Hey everyone, it's Lumen here. I was going to stream an arena game as I usually do on Thursday mornings here, but the arena queue sucked. So instead, what I've done with all my friends in Twitch chat here is create an outline for a strategy video that I've been trying to put out, or thinking about putting out rather, for a few months. And the topic of this micro strategy video is fencing arrangements, because often as you learn Agricola, the optimal fencing arrangements are really not that intuitive. If you think about it mathematically, it's really not too bad, but in terms of actually executing it in a game, if you haven't taken the time to think about it, this video is for you. So, with that said, one more caveat is this is not about optimal fence timing or the strategy about when you fence. That is an entirely different topic, and it's also pretty deep. This topic is just going to talk about what you should do when you fence with a certain amount of wood and what larger overall goals are there. So to start off, we have our normal fencing arrangement. This normal fencing arrangement gives you 4 pastures, which is the maximum you can get points for. It takes up 6 spaces on your farm, and it will net you 11 points. So why is this fencing arrangement good? This fencing arrangement usually provides, or usually is like a plurality of cases, it will give you the highest point ceiling by the end of the game. What you want to do with these pastures is you can hold all 3 types of animals at pretty high capacity. Like you could typically have 4 sheep, 5 pigs, and 4 cows. It allows you to fill up 9 spaces with fields and rooms. And 9 spaces with fields and rooms is also a lot of point ceiling. We want to score very highly on the point categories on the scorecard. So those are the overall goals of this fencing arrangement. Now, something that I didn't include here is that if you happen to be 2 wood short, you can omit these 2 fences. You can lose 1 point by fencing 13. You will lose a bit of animal capacity as well, because you won't have the flexibility of what animal types to hold. You'll have capacities 8, 2, 2, and 1, and that's just worse than 4, 4, 2, 2, 1. But this is the normal fencing arrangement to go for. In terms of where you're going to place it, I'll cover most of that later, but for the most part, I think doing it here is good. A fun note is that it doesn't really matter where you put the 5 internal fences in your 2x3 box. Pretty much, well, not pretty much all, but most arrangements of 5 fences, as long as you create 2 2x1s and 2 1x1s, that's normal good, is what I would call it. Now, of course, you see a whole variety of fence arrangements when you look at Agricola game, and the next one I want to talk about is fencing tight. So this tight fencing arrangement is also maximizing the pastures scoring category, and it does it with 12 wood. You always want to do this when you think you can cover the rest of your spaces with things that give you point ceiling. So, for example, as I have in the outline, hide farmer means you're just paying a food to cover spaces with points. That's way better than spending extra wood on covering those spaces with points. Stable architect and muckrake also do that if you can fill out these non-pasture spaces with stables. Hey, Kimball, the correct way. Yeah, Kimball's favorite is tight because Kimball's very good at finding point ceiling, filling up the other 11 spaces on his farm. And again, I will stress that's very important to know how you're doing that if you choose to fence tight. Of course, this also has less animal capacity, so you have to know that you're not intending to get a zillion animals. If you put stables in all 4 of these pastures, then your animal capacity is quite good. But if you're covering these spaces with stable architect or muckrake, that's just basically impossible. So that's what to notice when you want to fence tight and why. So now, as opposed to tight varieties, we have a bunch of wide varieties to think about. when I fence wide with like a general goal, this is what I'm going to aim for. This is 3 pastures, 8 spaces, and costs 15 wood. The animal capacity is pretty good, especially if you can get stables into these 2 small pastures. And overall, you're getting a lot of points for this. This is worth 12 points. Now, as I have in the first bullet here, when you fence wide, you are probably losing point ceiling in a vacuum. And that's because your pasture category is not getting to 4 spaces, and you only have 5 spaces to plow fields and build rooms. That means either your rooms category or your fields category is not going to be maximized either. So when you do this, you want to have point ceiling considerations and benefits for fencing wide. Now, the most obvious benefit to fencing wide is if it's late in the game and you weren't able to fill out these spaces with plows or fields, then yes, these wide arrangements will net you 12 and 13 points, and that's just better than 11, 9, 10, or 11 points. So that's one reason we go wide. We also want to go wide when we have bonuses for going wide, so Manger and Big Country, as I'll get to in a bit more detail later, or Shepherd's Crook, these are great examples of things that give you bonus points back to make up for the point ceiling that you're losing when you go wide. So you want to have the backup benefit for that. So I'll just show you the other 2, or the other 3 ways to go wider and widest. You should note that as long as you're making the same shapes and they're connected, it doesn't really matter where they go. So, as an example of an equivalent fencing to the previous one, this would be equivalent to what I had on the screen previously because I have a 2x3 box with 2 1x1s connected. So there are different orientations of that, orientations and permutations of that. Now let's talk about wider. And what I define as wider covers 9 spaces. This is an arrangement that does it with 14 wood. You have a giant pasture and a very small pasture here. This costs 14 wood. But if you do have a 15th wood to spare, I would recommend you do this, because it gives you a second pasture that has pretty good capacity for animals without stabling. So this arrangement gets you 12 net points, same as the previous, but covers 1 extra space. And I personally think it's very rare that you want to go for this exact arrangement in the current BGA Revised Edition. Having 14 wood, I think, is a pretty good reason to go for this wider category, but you just have the very small pasture in any of your corners. And of course, if you have 15 wood and choose to do this, these 3 internal wood can really go anywhere and it's fine. So then the most unique, and what I'm calling widest, even though you can technically fence wider than this. I don't want to talk about that one, though. That one's even more of a special case. This is a fencing arrangement that gives you 10 spaces of coverage. It costs you 15 wood, and it gives you 2 pastures. But you have serious animal capacity issues because, 2 and 1 are not very high point ceiling for animal categories, and you're never going to need 18 of a certain animal. But this is the arrangement you choose if you have Big Country and Manger and have trouble plowing, because you can plow 3 spaces, fence 15, and get to your Big Country, and then Manger's also going to give you 4 points for that 10th space filled. So the boldest of all arrangements, this isn't quite the boldest. I'm not going to cover the one that basically never works. But this is what you do with Big Country, Manger, and plow problems, or if you have a lot of wood faster than plows and you can get Big Country out faster. So this is a pretty special case, but it is optimal in that narrow case. So now that we've seen normal, tight, wide, etc., let's talk about some middling options which can be optimal in certain circumstances. So first of all, I'll cover 4 pastures in 5 spaces for 14 wood. Yeah, Kimball knows the almost never optimal way. Yeah, okay. So this is the first option I have here in middle. How is this good? So it's 1 wood cheaper than normal, and it still gives you 4 pastures. It lowers your animal capacity a tiny bit, but this is good when you have a sure way of getting 5 fields and 5 rooms. If you know it's going to be relatively straightforward for you to get 5 fields and 5 rooms this game, or 6 fields and 4 rooms, for example with Swing Plow, then this is a fantastic fencing arrangement. So keep this one in mind. It gives you more capacity than tight. It covers up 1 more space, and it costs 2 more wood. So this is why I would choose this middle, is if I have, again, certainty covering the other spaces. Now, as an arrangement that kind of compromises between wide and normal, we have this 3 pastures and 7 spaces, what I like to think of as the boot. This internal fence can go here, or, you know, you can move this pasture up there and make it not look quite like a boot, but then aesthetics shame on you. You do this pretty much for exactly the compromise between normal and wide, is if you have some way of filling these spaces, or if you have a manger, this doesn't hurt you and it gives you slightly more capacity, because manger gives you an extra point when you fill 7 spaces versus 6, and that makes up for the pastures being 3 points instead of 4. Pretty rare that this is actually better than normal, but for example, if Constable's in play, this does cover an extra space, and there are reasons that you would choose this one. So this is rarer, but still good in some cases. Those are the 2 middle arrangements. Now we're down to special cases, and talking about placement. So in general, what I would say is that it's best to fence on the right edge of your farm. And the reason for that is because plows take up a space at a time, rooms take up a space at a time, but fences cover a whole bunch of space at a time. So if you don't have any reason or card benefits or restrictions from placing your rooms and fields wherever you want, I would argue that you want to have your fences tucked on the right side of your farm, and if they're smaller than that, into a corner. Now, let's talk about some exceptions to that. So, Shepherd's Crook. If you have Shepherd's Crook, you get 2 sheep for every 2x2 pasture you make. So here's an arrangement of 14 fences that comes with 4 sheep. Because you get 4 sheep, this is equivalent point-wise to the wide variety. Because if you do the wide variety, you get 3 pastures, but only 1 pasture qualifying for Shepherd's Crook. So you're getting, You're getting only 1 pair of sheep. So that's, you know, whatever amount of points that is, plus 12. This Shepherd's Crook arrangement gives you 11 immediate points, but gives you an extra point of sheep, right? Going from 2 sheep to 4 sheep is an extra point. Pretty much any time you have a certain number of sheep, that amount plus 2 will either give you 1 point or hopefully 4 food or some other benefit. And for that reason, it is very efficient to fence this way with Shepherd's Crook. Don't think too hard about losing these small points off of the wide versions because you're getting the 2 extra sheep. This is the best way to fence with Shepherd's Crook, in my opinion, it definitely is if you want to get 4 sheep from it. There is a way to cover a more awkward 8 spaces and get the Shepherd's Crook bonus, but that costs you an extra wood. Now, if you have field fences is a bit of a special case here, and I don't actually have my fields ready on board because of the previous sections. But field fences actually forces you to think about where your fields go in addition to fences. So what I would suggest, if you have field fences and you're willing to play it somewhat early, is that you start plowing from the top right corner going leftwards. You start going in this direction. And the reason for that is that while you could save a lot of wood, or at least more than 2 or 3 wood on field fences. So what I'm claiming is that having 3 plowed fields is very close to optimal, especially when considering timing and flexibility of fences. So if you have 3 fields and then you fence, you choose normal or wide, you're saving 3 wood. But you're saving 3 wood on an already optimal fence shape. If you choose to try to save more wood on field fences, you are most likely leaving one of these fence arrangements. And if you leave these fence arrangements, you are losing wood. So if you try to save extra wood on field fences, you're often going to cancel that out with the wood that you're losing from inefficiency in terms of shape. So just be very wary of saving extra wood on field fences. You only want to do that, in my opinion, if you're going to be able to hit one of these predetermined layouts. All right, now it's time to talk about optimal partial fencing. Optimal partial fencing can really be a lot of things. As you see, I have 7 options listed here that I would count as partial. In reality, only these 5 are truly partial. If you end up having to fence 10 or 11, your game's still going to be fine. You're only losing 1 or 2 points off of pastures in terms of point ceiling compared to the tight variety. And if you do the 10 or 11 fences early enough, you're still going to be able to get fences early and stuff animals into them. And this is now not talking about fence arrangement strategy anymore, but it's still very good. So for the most part, when it comes to fencing 4, 6, 7, 8, or 9, you want to think about what animal capacity you have and how many animal types you want to be breeding soon. That's the most important thing. You should choose an arrangement that maximizes the amount of breeding you can do. If you have other cards supporting your animal capacity, like Domestician Expert or Livestock Feeder with too much grain, even though I hate Livestock Feeder, or like a Wildlife Reserve, you can choose one of these smaller partial fencing arrangements and still do very well. But in general, if you don't have any of those cards, the partial fencing arrangement that lets you breed 2 animal types is this one. Because you have 1 breeding pair living in the pasture with 4 animals capacity and 1 breeding pair living in a combination of your house and the small pasture. Now, you will notice that this does not let you have a lot of flexibility in aiming for one of these optimal categories. You pretty much have to choose normal, tight, or one of the middles. So just be aware of that. If you do fence 9, you can stack this smaller pasture on top of the bigger one. It doesn't lose any wood value. And it opens up the boot shape, for example, so that might be better. In fact, is it ever not better? Well, if you do that, then you can't go tight. So choose where this smaller pasture goes based on if you think tight is your more likely ending or if boot is your more likely ending when it comes to fencing 9. And 7 is good. Let me show you 7. It's probably obvious to many of you, but to those of you who don't know what I mean by 7, I mean this. 2 1x1 pastures. Now, the downside of this is that if you don't have stables or other capacity helpers, you can't actually breed 2 types right now. You can only breed 1 type of animal. So just be very aware of that penalty if you choose for this partial fencing. But it is good if you think you're going to end with this wide version. It's still, this is totally fine to get a breeding pair early, or, a bunch of other, not too many other reasons. But there are some reasons to fence partially, and most of them involve getting a bunch of animals early. All right, So then mini pasture, I think, is a pretty clear sub part of this partial fencing. Mini pasture really can go anywhere. I find putting a mini pasture into a corner will be the most flexible later on, because having this 1x1 in a corner doesn't really restrict what you can do. Pretty much all of your possibilities are still open if you do this. Maybe one or two of these are harder to do, but for the most part, they're all available. And then if you have Hedgekeeper, you're going to want to choose one of these partial fences to start off with. And then you want to get to 10 or 11 total fences by your second one. Though I guess you could get 7 or 9, and that's still fine. So Hedgekeeper, you're just basically moving along the partial fencing spectrum until you get to one of the final versions. And in your final Hedgekeeper, you're probably going to have normal, tight, or one of the middle options, I think. And that basically covers the outline. What do we have in chat here before we end this video? Do I have a preference for partial fencing on the top edge versus the bottom edge? It probably won't matter. Most likely it won't matter. I do this one because I like the idea of doing wide in the way I showed earlier. But if you do it here, you can still do wide on these 8 spaces, and it's fine. Just be careful of where you're starting your fields in each case. So if I do here, I'm going to start my fields in this corner most likely. And if I do it down here, I'm going to start my fields in this spot, or one of these spaces, or this corner. I find that one a bit weirder. I feel like this one is more straightforward for me to do less like mental work. But good question. I don't really have a great answer because it doesn't usually matter. All right, so that's this video, micro strategy on fencing arrangements. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any comments down in the comments section. As you can see, I'm doing this on Twitch. You should follow me on Twitch because I stream Agricola 4 times a week. And in the very rare cases where I don't get an Agricola game, I will try to do something like this. Thanks all for watching. See you next time.